I wasn't even supposed to be there that weekend. My plans had fallen through at the last minute. My friend bailed on a cabin trip upstate, and suddenly I was stuck with a packed duffel bag and nowhere to go. My roommate, Ben, was out of town visiting family, and the idea of staying alone in our too-quiet apartment didn't sit right with me, so I did what I always do when I'm in a rut. I called Evan. Evan wasn't just an old friend. He was the friend. We met freshman year of college during an icebreaker event neither of us wanted to attend, and somehow ended up as dorm neighbors. He'd been a constant in my life ever since. The kind of guy who never asked questions when I needed a place to crash, and always had a beer and a worn-out blanket ready on his couch. "Come down," he said without hesitation, voice warm through the phone. "We're doing a fire pit night with some of the guys. You'll like it, chill vibes." I needed chill vibes badly, so I grabbed my bag and got on the late train to his small town 2 hours away, where Evan had moved after college for a job that sounded both prestigious and way too demanding. He rented a house with 2 other guys I hadn't met, one of whom was apparently out of town, which meant I'd have a spare bedroom for the weekend. Better than my own apartment and the sound of my neighbor's dog howling every time an ambulance passed by. By the time I arrived, it was dark and cool. Early fall air crisp enough to make my hoodie feel thin. Evan greeted me at the door with that same mischievous grin he always had, hair a little longer than I remembered, arms stronger. He hugged me like no time had passed, and for a second I forgot why I'd felt so stuck in the first place. Inside, the house smelled like a mix of firewood and something slightly citrusy. Music played low from a speaker in the corner, and there were already a few guys gathered in the backyard, beer bottles clinking, fire crackling. "I forgot how tall you are," Evan teased, handing me a beer as we made our way outside. "You been working out, or is that just an illusion from your puffer jacket?" "An illusion," I said, cracking the beer. "I've been living off takeout and caffeine." We settled around the fire, easy laughter filling the space, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relaxed. That's when I saw him. He walked into the backyard like he lived there, though I knew he didn't. Evan stood and greeted him casually, arms thrown around shoulders in a brief bro hug. And then he turned toward me. "This is Drew," Evan said, gesturing between us. "Drew. This is my best friend from college. Noah." Noah. His name fit him too well, quietly powerful. Stormy-eyed. He had this presence that made it hard to look away without understanding why. He was tall but not too tall, lean but not scrawny, with dark hair that curled a little at the ends and a jawline that belonged in a men's skincare commercial. I hated that my first thought was, "He's beautiful." He nodded at me, a small smile. Hey, I replied a little too quickly. I thought that was it. Just a greeting. But for the rest of the night, I felt his eyes on me in flickers. Not long stares. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough that I noticed. And when I caught his gaze once, I didn't look away either. It was nothing. Probably. By midnight, most of the guys had either left or gone inside. Evan had disappeared to dig out an old board game, and I was left outside alone with Drew. He hadn't talked much all night, just laughed at the right moments, nodded at the right stories. But now, under the fire's glow, he turned toward me with a small tilt of his head. "So," he said, voice low, easy, "you and Evan, ever a thing?" I blinked. No, God, no, we're just friends." He smirked slightly like he already knew. "You seem close." "We are, but not like that." He nodded, looking into the fire for a beat, then back at me. "Cool." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, somehow. Like we were both waiting for something neither of us wanted to say out loud. And then Evan returned, game in hand, calling us back inside, and the moment, whatever it was, passed. But later, as I lay in the unfamiliar guest bed, I kept thinking about the way Drew had looked at me when he asked that question, and why it mattered so much that I had said no. I didn't sleep well that night, not because the bed was uncomfortable. It wasn't. Not because the house was loud. Far from it. It was quiet enough to hear the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I just couldn't stop thinking about Drew. About how his question had come out of nowhere. About the way he looked at me when I answered. About the way my chest felt a little too tight when I replayed the moment in my head for the 5th time. Then the 10th. At some point I heard footsteps in the hallway. Light ones. Someone moving toward the bathroom, or maybe just pacing. I didn't move. Just stared at the ceiling and let the darkness wrap around me like a question I didn't have an answer for. The next morning, Evan was already up and making coffee when I wandered into the kitchen, hair a mess, eyes still bleary. "Sleep okay?" he asked, pouring me a mug like it was second nature. "Yeah." "Sort of," I lied, taking the mug with a grateful nod. Drew wasn't around. His room door was closed, silent. I almost asked about him, but I didn't want to sound too curious. "He works remote," Evan said, as if reading my mind. "Might be catching up on some stuff this morning." I nodded, tried to act cool about it, but I felt weirdly restless, like there was unfinished business from the night before that had been left hanging in the air. We spent the morning running errands. Evan had to grab groceries for the week and pick up a package. I tagged along, the way I always had when we lived in the same city, but my mind wasn't fully there. I kept wondering if Drew had mentioned anything to Evan. If he thought I'd been weird. If I had been weird. By the time we got back, Drew's door was open and he was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a faded t-shirt and athletic shorts. He looked up when we walked in and gave me a nod, a quick smile that was maybe friendly or maybe something more. I couldn't tell. "Morning," he said, though it was closer to noon. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. The rest of the day passed in that strange limbo where everything looks normal but feels like it's on edge. Drew was polite, helpful when Evan cooked dinner, even made a sarcastic comment about the bougie salad Evan insisted on making. He was perfectly chill, which only made it worse, because I couldn't tell if I had imagined the tension the night before. That night, after Evan went to bed early, something about an early call with a client, Drew and I ended up on the couch, both of us flipping through Netflix like we were actually going to agree on something to watch. "You can pick," I said finally, tossing the remote to him. He scrolled aimlessly for a few seconds, then landed on some crime documentary neither of us were paying attention to after 10 minutes. The room fell into a lazy quiet, the kind that should have felt boring. But it didn't. "You really haven't seen Evan since college?" Drew asked after a while. "Not in person, just texting, some calls." He nodded slowly. "You guys seemed close." "We were," I said. "Still are, I guess." He turned toward me a little, elbow on the back of a couch. "So why not?" "What do you mean?" "You and him," he said, voice low. "You ever think about it?" I blinked. "Not really." Drew raised an eyebrow. I sighed. "Okay, maybe for like 5 seconds back in sophomore year, but it never went anywhere." "That part of him isn't really open." "Right," he said quietly, then looked away, nodding to himself. We sat there for another minute, both pretending to watch the screen, but something had shifted again. It was like the air got thicker, heavier. "Well," Drew said, pushing off the couch, "I'm gonna head to bed. Got a bunch of work calls tomorrow." "Yeah, cool," I said, standing up too. He paused at the hallway, glanced back at me. "Night, Noah, night." But the way he said it, it landed differently. Not casual, not indifferent, something else, something slower, like he meant for it to linger. And it did. I stared at the empty hallway long after he disappeared into his room. The next day was quiet. Evan was gone early. He left a note on the counter about meeting a client 2 towns over and said he'd be back late. That left Drew and me alone in the house. Again, I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I stayed in the guest room most of the morning, catching up on emails I'd been ignoring and pretending I wasn't listening for footsteps down the hall. Around noon, I finally stepped out to grab something to eat and found Drew already in the kitchen, shirtless, working on something in the skillet like it was just another regular Thursday. He glanced up, eyes scanning me for a second before going back to his food. "You hungry?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "You cooking for two or just flexing your skills?" He smirked. "I'll share. Don't make it weird." We ate at the breakfast bar, both pretending the air between us wasn't tingling with something unspoken. He asked about my job. I asked about his. It felt casual. Almost. Afterward, he went back to his room, door halfway closed. I stayed in the living room, tried watching a show, but ended up zoning out after the first 10 minutes. It was around 3 p.m. when I passed his room to use the bathroom, and I swear I wasn't planning anything, but I noticed the door was open, and he was lying on his bed, one arm behind his head, phone in the other hand, scrolling. Just existing. The light from the window hit him at this perfect angle, and I froze for a beat too long. He looked up. "You good?" he asked. I shook myself out of it. "Yeah, just, sorry. You want to come in?" His voice was casual, like he didn't notice the way I hesitated, like he didn't know what kind of war was going on in my head. But I stepped in anyway. "Didn't mean to interrupt your scroll time," I joked. "You didn't." He tossed his phone to the side. "Kinda nice having someone else in the house who doesn't make weird kale smoothies and talk about real estate all the time." I chuckled, sitting awkwardly on the edge of his bed. "I don't know, I might start pitching you on investment properties if you're not careful." We talked. About nothing, really. He asked what I'd do if I could drop everything and go anywhere. I said Tokyo. He said New Zealand. He leaned back against the wall, legs stretched out, one knee brushing mine, and he didn't move it. That part? That felt intentional. "So," he said, after a lull, "why haven't you dated anyone in a while?" I blinked. "That's a direct question." He shrugged. "We're adults. Might as well be honest." "I don't know," I said slowly. "Been busy. Work's been a lot. And it's hard meeting people when you're not into the whole apps and awkward first drinks thing." He nodded. "Yeah, same." I looked at him. "You don't seem like the type to struggle with that." Drew gave a short laugh, eyes flicking toward me. "You'd be surprised." The silence that followed was different than before. It stretched out like it was waiting for one of us to make a move. I didn't. Eventually, he broke it with a question that landed harder than he probably meant it to. "Do you think if Evan wasn't around, you and I would have talked more sooner?" I didn't know how to answer that. My throat went dry. Before I could say anything, he stood up, stretched, and mumbled, "I need some air." And then he left me sitting there on the edge of his bed, heart pounding, every word he'd just said echoing louder than anything else that day. I didn't see Drew again until after sunset. He hadn't been in the house when I checked. His shoes were gone from the entryway, and I figured he went for a run, or maybe to clear his head. I wasn't sure if he needed space or if I needed it more. Evan still wasn't back. The house felt too still, like it was waiting for something to happen. Around 8 p.m., I was halfway through a reheated plate of pasta when I heard the door creak open. Drew walked in, his hoodie damp around the collar, hair a little wet from sweat or maybe from a quick rinse at the gym. He tossed his keys onto the counter without looking at me and went straight for the fridge. "Hey," he said finally, pulling out a bottle of water. "Hey," I echoed, a little more carefully. I wanted to ask where he'd gone, but it felt too loaded. Instead, we lingered in the kitchen, him leaning against the fridge, me standing by the sink, 2 feet apart, neither of us saying what we were actually thinking. "You ever just want to turn your brain off?" he asked suddenly. "All the time." He nodded. "Sometimes I go for drives with no music, just to hear the road." "That sounds kind of sad," I said with a small smile. "Maybe." He twisted the bottle cap slowly. "But sometimes, silence is the only thing that makes sense." That hit harder than I expected. I didn't respond, just watched him drink, the line of his throat moving with each swallow. I should have looked away, but I didn't. He noticed. "You do that a lot," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Look at me like you're trying not to." I froze. "I'm not." "It's okay," he said, stepping a little closer. "I'd do it too." I didn't breathe. Not properly. He moved past me to grab a fork from the drawer, the air shifting as his shoulder brushed mine. It was subtle, almost nothing, but not nothing. His voice was closer now, quieter. "You're not very subtle, Noah." I swallowed hard. "Neither are you." That made him smile, a crooked thing that made my stomach flip. We ended up back in the living room, both pretending we hadn't just broken some invisible rule. We picked a random documentary again, something neither of us cared about, and sat on opposite ends of the couch. At first, over the next hour, the space between us shrank. It wasn't intentional, but also, it kind of was. My legs stretched out, his foot bumped mine, then didn't move. Eventually, we were side by side, the corner of his thigh pressing into mine. He didn't pull away, neither did I. At some point, he shifted, arms stretched along the back of the couch, fingertips brushing the side of my shoulder. My pulse jumped, my breath caught. And still, I didn't move. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I didn't think this weekend was going to be like this." I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. "Like what?" he shrugged. "Complicated." I wanted to say it didn't have to be. That we could stop right now, go back to being two guys watching documentaries. But I didn't believe that. Not really. "What are you doing?" I asked instead. His eyes flicked to my lips, then back to mine. "What do you think I'm doing?" The silence stretched. I felt the heat rising up my neck, the weight of his hands so close to mine, the inches between our mouths shrinking with every second neither of us moved. Then he said, softer than before, "You know what you're doing too." I didn't sleep much that night either. The next morning came too fast, sunlight leaking in through the slats of the blinds like it was trying to expose something we'd both left unsaid. I woke up with that tight feeling in my chest, the kind you get when something almost happened and you're not sure if you're relieved or disappointed. The couch still smelled like Drew's cologne, that clean, woody scent that had practically carved itself into my brain. Evan was already back. His voice drifted from the kitchen, upbeat like nothing was off. "Morning, man," he called when he saw me walk in. "We still on for that hike later?" "Yeah," I replied, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Sounds good." Drew wasn't around. Again, I tried not to make that mean something. The hike was uneventful, scenic, long. I was grateful for the distraction. Evan talked about work, about some girl he'd been texting, about possibly moving back to the city. I nodded and chimed in when it felt natural. But I wasn't all there. Back at the house, I took a shower, hoping it would clear my head. It didn't. When I got out, I passed Drew in the hallway. He had a towel slung over his shoulder and earbuds in. We locked eyes for half a second, long enough for something silent to pass between us. Then he kept walking. The rest of the day was a slow burn. We stayed in, played a few rounds of Mario Kart with Evan, shared a frozen pizza, watched a movie. It was normal, familiar, but I could feel it every time Drew was near me. A glance too long, a touch too casual, a silence that felt less like nothing and more like waiting. Later that night, Evan went to bed early again, something about catching up on emails. I stayed in the kitchen, scrolling on my phone, nursing a half-warm beer. Drew came in not long after, shirt tucked up behind his neck as he scratched his shoulder. He poured himself a glass of water, then leaned on the counter beside me. "You ever think about just saying screw it?" he asked suddenly. I looked over. "To what?" "To whatever's messing with your head." I didn't answer right away. "Yeah. Sometimes." He set his glass down, then turned to face me fully. "You want to go for a drive?" he asked. It was after midnight. The air outside had cooled, the streets empty. We drove in silence for the first few minutes, windows cracked, the soft sound of wind filling the space. Drew didn't say where we were going. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly near the gear shift. His fingers tapped against the console, like he was keeping time with a song that wasn't playing. Eventually, he pulled off into a small overlook on the edge of town, the kind of spot where high school kids probably snuck off to drink or hook up. We sat there for a minute. "You don't have to say anything," he said finally, "but I'm not good at pretending nothing's happening." I stared out at the faint lights of the town below. "I'm not either." "So what are we doing?" he asked, voice lower now. I turned to face him. "I don't know." He reached across the console then, hand hovering near mine. "Can I?" I nodded before I even knew what I was agreeing to. His fingers brushed against mine, tentative at first. Then, more certain. The first touch wasn't some movie moment. It was quiet. Careful. Real. And it didn't feel like a mistake. We sat there, hand in hand, saying nothing for a long time. The quiet was thick. Not uncomfortable, just dense with everything we weren't ready to say. His thumb grazed the back of my hand like he was testing if this was really happening, like he wasn't sure it was allowed. Neither was I. "This feels weird," he said finally, still not looking at me. "I know," I said, "but not bad." He nodded, staring out the windshield. "I've never done this before," I swallowed. "What? This?" He let out a breath. "No, this. Wanting this with someone like you." I wanted to ask what he meant by someone like you, but I didn't push. I could feel the tension in his grip, something between fear and hope. The silence stretched again. "I don't know what this means," he admitted. "Me either," I said quietly. But I didn't let go. We stayed like that until it got too cold, the windows fogged from our breath. Then he drove us back, neither of us saying much. When we got to the house, the porch light was still on. We stood in the driveway for a minute, both hesitating. "You coming in?" I asked. He gave me a look like he wanted to, but shook his head. "I need to think." I nodded. "Okay." That night, back in the guest room, I lay awake again. My heart wouldn't shut up, thudding loud and fast in the dark. I kept replaying the moment he touched my hand, the way it had made everything else go quiet. I didn't see him the next morning. His door was closed. Evan and I had coffee in the kitchen, talking about a farmer's market we might hit before I left. I tried to act normal, like my entire brain hadn't been rewired overnight. "You good?" Evan asked at one point. "Yeah," I lied again. The hours ticked by. No sign of Drew. I had my bag packed, and by the door when he finally appeared, hair messy, sweatshirt pulled over one shoulder like he'd barely gotten dressed. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Hey." Evan stepped outside to take a call, giving us a few precious minutes alone. Drew walked up, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking to my bag. "You leaving?" "Yeah. Catching the train in an hour." He nodded, jaw tight. "Okay." Neither of us said anything for a second. Then he stepped closer. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I'm glad I did too." He reached out, then paused, unsure. I closed the gap, letting our hands find each other again. It was soft, brief, but deliberate. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "You don't have to," I said. "Just don't disappear." That got the smallest smile out of him. Evan called from the porch that it was time to head out. Drew and I let go, but not fast, not like we were trying to hide it. In the car, I kept thinking about how his fingers had lingered, and how much I already missed it. The train ride back felt longer than it should have. The town blurred past the window, all sleepy streets and wide sky, but I couldn't focus. I kept staring at my phone, wondering if Drew would text, wondering if I should. I didn't. Not that day, or the next. I told myself he needed space, that whatever this was between us, it wasn't the kind of thing you pushed. And maybe he'd never text. Maybe that moment in the car, the touch of his hand in mine, was all it would ever be. But then, 4 days later, he did. Still thinking about that night. "You around this weekend?" Just like that, my chest tightened. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I responded. "Yeah." "You want me to come back?" His reply was fast. "If you do, I won't pretend next time." I booked the train right then. When I got back to Evan's place, it was late. The porch light was on again, but this time, Drew was waiting. He didn't say anything, just stepped forward and pulled me into the kind of hug that makes you forget everything else. His hand gripped the back of my neck, and for the first time I felt how scared he was. Not scared of me, scared of what it meant, of what he was allowing himself to feel. Inside, we didn't rush it. No dramatic music, no heavy breathing, just two guys who were tired of pretending. He kissed me slow, careful, like he wasn't sure it would last, and wanted to memorize every second just in case. And I let him. That night, he curled up behind me in the same bed where he'd first asked me if Evan and I were a thing. His arm wrapped around my waist like it belonged there, like it always had. I didn't sleep much, but not because I was anxious. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt still. In the morning, he made coffee and handed me a mug with a smirk. "You're not gonna make this weird, are you?" he asked. "Already weird," I said. "Yeah," he replied, smiling. "But maybe not bad. I don't know what we are now. We haven't put a label on it. And maybe we never will, but every time he looks at me now, there's no more pretending. And that's enough. For now, that's more than enough."